Well, hello, welcome back. This is part 2 of a 3-part series of our Christian Apologetics course called Why We Believe in What We Believe. Now, if you haven't seen part 1, I would encourage you to go back to the first video, watch the first video, because this part 2 finishes off us addressing the philosophical misunderstanding about Christianity and about God in general. So I would encourage you to go back to part 1 before you continue. Well, just to recap, in our last discussion, we finished off by talking about the hidden God, that God left enough evidence for those who truly want to seek Him with their hearts. Now, in this session, we will start to gather and analyze evidence to conclude that a theistic God exists. Then we will compare this evidence of this theistic God and compare that to what the Bible defines as the God of the Bible and see whether there is any similarities or in fact indeed is the same. And thirdly, we will then look at the plausibility of miracles and why God uses miracles, the purpose of it, and the reasons for it. And we will do all this without using the Bible. Now, to identify God, to identify Him, we use the scientific method called cause and effect. We can know about the invisible things by not looking at the invisible things, by observing its effects. For instance, we know there is wind by observing the effects of wind, like the bending of a tree branch. We know that's Wi-Fi. We can't see Wi-Fi, but we can see the effect of Wi-Fi by looking at our data on the phone. We can then conclude that by looking at the effects, that the invisible things do exist, even though we can't see it with our eyes. Now I'm going to ask you the question, what about God? See, the theistic religion teaches that God exists, but God is invisible. We can't see Him. But there are effects that we can see. Yes, Einstein actually was the first person who showed that the universe was really a big effect. Einstein pointed out that there is a cause to this effect. And this cause was a supreme being called God, and that's Einstein. You see, at that time, scientists really, did not like what Einstein said. Well, basically, until Einstein, they all thought that the universe was eternal before Einstein. In other words, there was no beginning to the universe until Einstein's general relativity theory. That theory showed that the universe had a beginning. In fact, Einstein himself was actually disappointed, being a scientist, with his own realization that his theory pointed to a God who caused the universe. I mean, Einstein, being a scientist himself, wanted the universe to be self-existent, just like all the other scientists, but his theory supports the oldest argument of the existence of God. Now, there are 3 arguments that supports the existence of God. The first one is the beginner argument, which is termed cosmological argument. The second argument is the designer argument, which is called teleological argument. And the third argument is the lawgiver argument, called the moral law argument. And we're going to look at all these in this series. Now, the book that I quoted earlier in video 1, entitled I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, covers this comprehensively. And if you want to really know more about it, I would encourage you to read the book. This course, it's just only going to scratch the surface, just to give you enough entree for you to go and deeply get into it if you are truly interested. Now let's start with the first argument, called the beginner argument. And in its most simplistic form, the argument goes something like this. every effect must have a cause, which means anything that has a beginning must have a cause. The universe had a beginning. Therefore, the universe must have a cause. It must have a beginner, in other words. That's how the argument goes. So, something or someone must have caused the universe to begin. It couldn't come from nothing. It had to come from someone or a being, if you like. This beginner, this being created a space that is 90 billion light years from end to end, created a space for billions of galaxies and stars, created gazillion planets in this space that he created, and created life forms in this space on one such planet. Now, to do that, this being must be absolutely incredibly powerful and intelligent to cause this to happen. What has to be a powerful being we choose to call God. And we will see later this God is the same God as the God of the Bible. And it is the same God whom ancient Chinese prayed to. And the ancient Chinese called this God, this Almighty God, Shangdi. Thousands and thousands of years before Buddha was born, before Confucius was born, before Lao Tzu was born. You see, science has really helped us establish that the universe had a beginning. Well, the scientists call it the Big Bang. If you want to read more about it, go to that book. It points that science supports the notion that there is a Big Bang. Now, there are 5 points that supports this Big Bang theory. The first one, the second law of thermodynamics in science tells us that the universe is running out of usable energy, meaning like a limited battery life. You know, the sunlight uses energy. Using up all the energy, the whole universe is starting to run out of energy. Now, if the universe was eternal, the energy would have run out by now. By now, we would have a dark universe. But do we have a dark universe? No, we don't. Lights are still on, sunlight's still on. And this concludes that universe is not eternal. Therefore, universe must, if it's not eternal, then it must have a beginning. That's the first point. The second scientific point is that the universe is expanding. It's expanding. In 1911, Albert Einstein predicted that the universe was expanding. And this was confirmed by Edwin Hubble, who invented his Hubble telescope. And through this telescope, Hubble saw a rate shift in the light in the universe, which indicated that the galaxies were moving away from us on Earth. Then scientists then reverse this theory, and they conclude into their Big Bang. You see, what they're saying is, if we reverse this expanding theory, reverse the recording of this history of the universe, we would see it would come back and it would collapse, it will go back into a point so small that is defined as no thing. They call it a singularity. It will just compress into something that's so small. And then they say, in short, once there was nothing, and then bang, then there was something. See, according to them, the entire universe exploded from nothing into something. In fact, before time, space, and matter, there was no thing. Then, bang, it happened. Time, space, and matter was created. Scientific discussions. The third point was scientists saw radiation afterglow, the RA. In 1965, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson discovered radiation afterglow. They picked up remnant radiation left over from the Big Bang. It's a sort of cosmic radiation, if you like. From there, they realized that and concluded that there was a Big Bang and there was a form of beginning. Another proof that there was a big explosion in the distant past. And the fourth point they came up with, they realized there were galaxy seeds. Scientists believe from Einstein's theory of relativity that the leftover radiation from the Big Bang must have some form of temperature variation. They call it ripple. And in 1989, satellite collected data looking for temperature variation. And they found that there was matter long time ago before the current galaxies were formed. And thus the origin, thus they term it as the original seeds of the current galaxies. And of course, the fifth point, its scientific point, was EMC squared, Einstein's theory of relativity. Einstein's theory of relativity brought into focus that the universe is not eternal. Einstein's theory of relativity states that the universe actually had a beginning. Now, based on science, we confirm that the universe actually had a beginning. Therefore, if it had a beginning, there must be a beginner. Your universe is therefore not eternal. Now, then this raises a question. Who is this beginner? Who is this person that created this huge expanse of space that goes from 90 billion years from end to end? Who is this first cause of this beginning? Let's use some everyday examples here. Let's look at a mobile phone. A mobile phone is not eternal. We know that. And a mobile phone has a beginning. Because if it is eternal, the mobile phone will be a pile of rusty iron filings by now. Now, if the mobile phone has a beginning, then someone must have caused it to begin in the first place. Therefore, it has to have a beginner. Someone or no one caused the mobile phone. Now, which requires more faith? Which is more plausible explanation? Someone created it, or the mobile phone just pops into existence? No one created it. You see, the first cause must also be supernatural or natural. Well, this is why. This first cause has to have existed before the beginning, before the natural world existed, before the universe existed, before the existence of time, space, and matter. He has to have existed to cause this to exist. To cause the natural world, that is the universe, the time and space and matter, this being or this person must be outside the natural world. He must be timeless, eternal. He must be spaceless, non-spatial. This being must be immaterial, must be invisible. In other words, this being must be self-existent, must be eternal and invisible. We just described a supernatural being. Let's call this the first cause. The first cause of this supernatural being has to be supremely intelligent, unimaginably powerful to create the entire universe with such precision. This being must be personal and has the will and the purpose. They choose to create from a state of nothingness into a universe with time, space, and matter. Remember that these characteristics of the first cause beginner, if you like, are not derived from any religious doctrines yet. Remember that. So far, they have derived from observations of science and logic and reasonable thinking. But let's have a look at now some religious text. Let's have a look at what was written in the Bible. These words were written in thousands of years ago in the Bible, describing the Big Bang. It said, and I quote, "In the beginning," which is time, "God," which is the first cause, "created the heavens," which is space, "and the earth," which is matter, unquote. This is found in Genesis 1:1 in the Bible. When you look at these attributes, does it not sound familiar to you? Aren't they the same attributes as that observed by science and logic as what we just talked about? Now I'm comparing it to what the Bible is talking about. With these 10 words in the Bible, meaning the first cause, who is eternal, right from the start, created time, created space, which is heaven, so that we can put stuff in it. It created matter. See, the first 10 words of this religious book called the Bible explain the Big Bang theory that scientists have been talking about for years. I quote Robert Jastrow, who was the first chairman of NASA. He was an American astrologer and planetary physicist and scientist. And he said this, and I quote, in an interview, "Now we see how the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The details differ, but the essential elements of the astronomical and biblical accounts of Genesis are the same. The chain of events leading to a man commenced suddenly and sharply at a definite moment in time in a flash of light and energy." Then he continues to say, astronomers now find they have painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, even planet, and every living thing in this cosmos and on this earth. And they have found that all this happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. How powerful is that? And this is a scientist. He's a scientist talking. So given what we have discussed so far, we can now conclude that the universe had a beginning. And if it had a beginning, it had to have a beginner. And this beginner is a supreme being, very much like God, God of the Bible. I would say, yes, it makes sense. And this is not all. We have two other points to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that God exists. And these two other points are the designer arguments and the lawgiver argument. And we will go there now. The next argument, designer argument, scientists would call it teleological argument. Telos being a Greek word for design or a study of purpose. And there are two parts to this argument. Part one is the designer of the universe, and part two is the designer of life form. Before we get into that, let me ask you this question. Well, let me suggest you think about this question. For something to come into existence, it either has to come from an intelligent source, that is by a being with a purpose and power and ability to do it, or it has to come from a natural source by forces of nature, the wind, the gravity, sand, water. Only two sources. Let me ask you what caused this. Let's try and have a look at it. Intelligent source, intelligent being, or nature? Mobile phone. Well, most would say would come from an intelligent being. It has to be designed, it has to be manufactured, has to be made. What about rock formation at the Grampians here in Victoria? Well, it'll be a natural cause. The wind, the sand, water caused the rock formation at the Grampians. Well, the question is, why do you know all this? Your knowledge is based on your own observation today. That's why you know all this, because you never observe that a mobile phone simply pops up by natural forces. We've never seen that. You have observed that phones needed to be designed, needed to be made, needed to be manufactured. That's our observation. See, what we have just done, we have just applied the law of uniformity, or common sense it's called. This law asserts that things in the past have the similar causes as things that you observe today. So you can conclude by looking and observing at phones today that in the past, the phones must have also similarly have been manufactured because of what you've seen and observed today. Similarly to the rock formation at the Grampians here in Victoria, by your observations and experience, you can conclude that natural laws did in the past, even though you did not see it being formed. So you can conclude that natural laws had created this rock formation. Because we see nature doing the same thing today, so it has to have done the same thing in the past to this Grampians, this rock formation at the Grampians. So that's the basis of the law of uniformity. Well, how about the earth and the universe? How about life form? Applying this common sense or law of uniformity, you can conclude that they had to have an intelligent cause, because you have never seen a human being suddenly pop up, just appear in front of you, or you've never seen an earth just suddenly pop up in front of you in the middle of the night. We've never seen that, have we? So I want you to have this concept in mind, this concept, law of uniformity, and let us examine the designer of the universe and the designer of life form to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the designer is indeed God. So let's start with designer of the universe. The basis of this argument is this: every design has a designer. The universe is a highly complex design. Therefore, the universe had to have a designer. Those are the arguments. See, every design has to have a designer. Well, let's look at this logically. You're tracking up this rock formation up in Grampians here in Victoria to see nature at work. And as you're walking up, you found this golf ball. Well, let's ask this question. What caused the rock formation in the Grampians? Well, the answer, according to the law of uniformity, is, well, nature caused the rock formations at the Grampians. Then I ask you this question. What caused this golf ball that you found on the ground? Well, the answer would be, well, a factory. Somebody's made it. It must be designed by an intelligent being who was a designer, who knows all about golf. Common sense tells you that this has to be done by an intelligent being. Even if you are not there in a factory to see this golf ball being made, you know it is designed and it's made in a factory somewhere by an intelligent person, designed for a specific purpose, to have this golf game. So the universe is a highly complex design. Well, how do we know that? Well, life, science tells us, life can only be sustained given precious and specific conditions. You go out to space, you need a spacesuit. The universe is a harsh place to live in. The Earth atmosphere is actually a large spacesuit to keep you and I alive. In this atmosphere, within this earthly spacesuit, if you like, there are precise constants that make human life possible. There are at least 122 such constants in all to make us alive. Go to the book and the book will tell you in detail. A spacecraft travels about 27 kilometers an hour. The Earth is moving a lot faster than that, 107,000 kilometers an hour, because of the gravitational pull of the sun. Now, if this gravitational pull is altered by 0.34 spaces, 0.000000001, 34 times 0.0001%, there will be no sun, and when there's no sun, you and I will cease to exist. You see how finely tuned this gravitational pull is? In the atmosphere of the Earth, conditions for living, conditions for you and I waking up in the morning and being able to breathe and being able to live is very, very precisely tuned. We have to have a precise mixture of air. Oxygen has to be exactly at 21%. Carbon dioxide must be precise for the photosynthesis to work, for plants to grow. Without plants, we have no food. Earth must rotate completely in precisely 24 hours. Otherwise, the temperature change will be too great for you and I to live. We will die. The moon and the Earth must have the right gravitational pull. Jupiter, a cosmic vacuum cleaner, is about 2.5 times larger than all the planets put together. And the job of Jupiter is to pull meteorites into it because it has a larger gravitational pull. Without this, our Earth will be bombarded with millions of meteorites and we simply die. There are billions of stars out there. Each one of them is named. What are the odds? What are the odds that this constants, this precise condition, happen by chance to keep you and I alive? The odds would be close to zero. Unless there's some intelligent being behind it all, keeping us alive. Let's go back to that golf ball I was talking about. If looking at the golf ball, we can conclude that there has to be a designer because we observe that it is designed precisely for a purpose, for a ball to be able to fly through the air with minimal friction. You now imagine this golf ball being as big as the Earth. This Earth is precisely designed for a purpose, just like a golf ball. The Earth is very, very complex. It's balanced all these 122 constants to support life. Just like you would conclude that the golf ball is precisely designed for a purpose. Given all this, given this logical and reasonable thinking, we can conclude that the universe had to have a designer. Well, who or what designed the Earth ball and the universe? Someone who's got intelligence designed it, or no one designed it, or it just simply pops up out of chance. Think about it. Which of this explanation is more reasonable to believe? Designed by someone with intelligence, or is not designed at all? Well, we mentioned earlier that there are two parts to this design argument. First part is designer of the universe. Second part is designer of life form. And now let's go to unpacked designer of life form. What I want to always start with this question. What caused life to begin on planet Earth? Now, I know that's a $6 billion question. Well, we can put it down to two things. What caused it? Is it caused by an intelligent being with a purpose, or just by natural forces? Those are the two schools of thought, if you like, available today. Now, many believe it's from natural laws. That's the theory of evolution. They call themselves Darwinists. And this school of thought, believe that life began billions and billions of years ago in a warm, fuzzy, slimy pond. It began by spontaneous generation, no explanation, just simply popped up. It began from a non-living chemical, meaning life came from non-life spontaneously. And this is the evolutionist theory. And it came from non-life into a one-cell creature called an amoeba. And they believe that this one-cell creature evolved to form into other living beings. From this one-cell creature, by natural selection, came the fish, the donkey, the dog, the monkey, the human beings, your mom, my dad, your grandfather, everyone. Was God involved? No, they believe God was not involved. Any intelligence? No intelligence, no guidance at all. No intelligent being guided it, nothing. It just sort of spontaneously happened. Nature does it all. That is the basis of the evolutionist thinking. Well, let's logically think through this. And you will find that life form has to come from an intelligent being. You see, scientists tell us that in this one-cell amoeba, contains detailed messages that is very, very, very complex. That's a fact given by scientists. In this one-cell amoeba, there are messages or instructions for the cell to build and to replicate. Detailed instructions, messages with an intent and a purpose. Now, even thinking about that, any reasonable person will conclude that it can only be placed in this amoeba or this cell by an intelligent being, by a designer. Well, let's use some simple examples. I want you to imagine that you're on a holiday on a beach with your parents, lying on the sand, enjoying the sun, and the parents decided they want to go back to the beach home and retire early to cook dinner. And mom said to you specifically, when you come back to the beach home, do not forget to wash your feet before you get into the house because I don't want sand into my house. Okay, mom. Later on, you start to walk back home. And by the time you get to the front door, you see some scratchings on the ground, on the dirt. And the scratchings looks like some words. And the word says, you have a closer look, it says, wash your feet. Those are the words written there. Now, let me ask you this. Who do you think this message is from? Well, you would say it's from mom. Well, how do you know for sure it is not nature that did it? How do you know for sure that out of spontaneously a tree might have fallen down and wind would have scratched the dirt and they scratched out a message called wash your feet? I mean, that's one argument. But you know, because you know it's not, because you've never in your life observed nature spontaneously writing messages that has a purpose to you specifically. You have not in your life seen people, intelligent being, write, in your life, you have only seen intelligent being write messages for you with an intent. You've never observed nature doing that. So this message, wash your feet, had to have an intelligent cause, written by an intelligent being. And in this instance, it has to be a mom. You know, if your science teacher told you that message was caused by natural laws, by wind and rain and scratches and spontaneously, and not your mom, you would think that your teacher was just going bonkers. This message, wash your feet, has to be written by a mom. But you see, all over the world, kids are being taught that even more complex messages, like more complex messages than wash your feet, most complex messages written on human cells that they all believe that it's caused by natural cause without any intent or intelligence. Cells that contain millions and millions of instructions to operate the human body is caused by natural being, by some spontaneously. This teaching underscores the theory of evolution. The belief that no intelligent being is involved in forming life form, only natural laws. Let's have a look at DNA. Now, Darwin did not know anything about DNA and thus did not know how complex a cell could get. You know, he might have changed his mind about the theory of evolution if he had known about DNA. Well, let's explore this. This is why. See, evidence from science these days are finding out more and more about the complexity of the DNA. Discovered in 1959, it's the chemical that encodes instructions for building and replicating all living things. Science tells us that it's a very, very complex chemical structure, and they say it represents four letters: the A, the T, the C, and the G. Scientists found that the four letters A, T, C, and G are combined to make up messages for the cells, just like we combine the 26 alphabets to create a message in the English language. Well, I want you to look at this slide here as a jumble of alphabets in there, and it really doesn't make sense now until you rearrange those alphabets. Now, if we rearrange those alphabets, it's going to give you a message, and the message is, yes, wash your feet. See, just like that, cells rearrange the alphabets A, T, C, and G to create messages and purpose and intent to build, and replicate cells, teaching cells how to behave, if you like. So you see, it is special messages coded in the DNA that the cell receive instructions for them to do their job. It's almost like DNA is sending messages to the cells for them to do their job. It has to come. All this has to come from an intelligent source. I mean, how complex is this DNA? Putting a number on the complexity of the DNA would not do it justice. But let us just agree by saying that information in a DNA can fill thousands and thousands of thick books, volumes of books, if you like. Where did these thousands of books of information come from? Does it come from an intelligent being with a purpose and intent, or just simply by nature, by wind, by rain, by water, or by chance it spontaneously pops up? I mean, which would you believe? Which is more believable, let's put it? I mean, if we have no problems in believing and thinking that the message on the ground that says, wash your feet, was written by Mum, an intelligent being, we will have no problem concluding that thousands of books of information, of messages with an intent and purpose in a DNA has to be left by an intelligent being. Common sense tells us this. Common sense tells us that life form from this strong evidence of this has a strong evidence of design, and that it has to come from an intelligent being. And it points to a designer. It must. Who is this designer? Or is this designer someone with an intelligent ability to make and design things, or no one at all? Just simply pops up, just wind, rain, scratches on the ground. I mean, which one is more believable? We haven't finished yet. We have one more argument to prove the existence of God, the lawgiver. But even given those two, the design argument and the beginning argument, gives you a strong sense that the plausibility of God existing is very, very, very strong. Well, the moral law argument. Let's try and use this to prove the existence of God. This is the third argument, if you like, proving the existence of God without using the Bible so far. This moral lawgiver argument simply states that since we have a conscience within us, someone must have to put it in there. As simple as that. The logic goes like this. Every law must have a lawgiver. There is a moral law in all of us, in our hearts. Therefore, there must be a moral lawgiver. Well, let's try and play some word association here. And I'm going to say a word, and I want you to think whether this word relates to good or bad. I name something, you just think about whether it's good or bad. I would start. Hitler. Now, most would say bad. Jesus Christ. They all would say good. What about President Trump? Some would say good. Some would say bad. Now, the question I have is, what is the good or the bad based on? When people say it's good or when they say it's bad, what is this based on? Without an objective standard, no one can say what is good or what is bad. Each will only base their perspective of good or bad on their own personal opinion. Well, that's what some would argue. You see, C.S. Lewis famously said, you do not know what a line is crooked until you have a straight line. Only when you can compare your line to a straight line that you know that this line is crooked or straight. In other words, you need to have a non-changing standard of truth first before you can define what is good and what is bad. In other words, we cannot know something is wrong unless we know that what is right. We know what is intuitively and objective right in the first place. So the moral law argument, or conscious in us, is the ruler that tells us intuitively what is right and what is wrong. Now the question is, who put this law in our hearts? Somebody must have put it there. Somebody with the ability, with the power, with the strength to put it in there. Well, let's try this. When somebody says torturing babies is fun. Now, when we hear that, we naturally conclude that it is wrong because we have this intuitive moral law in us embedded in our hearts to come up with this conclusion that it is wrong. No, you don't have to learn about it. The best proof to the existence of the moral law we have in our hearts is the way we react to the behavior of others. Let's try this. Some people think it's okay to lie, to steal, to treat others badly. That's okay, until they are at the receiving end of this treatment. Then they think it is not good. See, for those who say that, well, Hitler's cruelty were not wrong, will very quickly change their minds if they were at the receiving end of Hitler's action. See, we do have a moral law in us. Even though some may not listen to the moral law, but not following and listening to the moral law doesn't mean that it is not there. So let's go back to the three principles that we have just covered. We talked each law has a lawgiver. Agree. Or every law has to have a lawgiver. We agree. There is a moral law in us. Yes, we agree. Therefore, there must be a moral lawgiver. Yes, we agree with that. Again, the question goes, who is this moral lawgiver? Is this law provided by an intelligent being with a purpose and an intent, or just simply by wind, forces, time, water, sand, by natural forces? It couldn't. I mean, a logical person would know intuitively it has to be provided by an intelligent being. So, let's now bring all these three arguments together that we covered to prove the existence of God without using the Bible. We asked, who is this beginner in our beginner argument? And we ask, who is this designer in our designer argument? And we ask, who is this moral lawgiver in our moral law argument? Let us now explore who this being is. Who is the beginner? Who is the designer? And who is this moral lawgiver? In other words, we are going to explore the identity of God. In our previous discussion, we provided logical evidence through reasoning and thinking that the universe had a beginning, that the universe is designed by an intelligent being, and there is a moral lawgiver. We went through all that. We used science, philosophy, and reasoning to conclude that the first cause, the beginner, must be self-existent, must be non-spatial and invisible. And we also concluded, using science, philosophy, and reasoning, that this being has to exist outside time, space, and matter, because time, space, and matter was created. In other words, this being is without limits. This being is absolutely powerful, and this being is supremely intelligent to create the universe with such incredible precision. This being has to be personal, as it chooses to convert a state of nothingness into time, space, and matter, It uses will and purpose to create something from nothing. Now, coincidentally, these characteristics of this being are exactly the characteristics that a theistic God is being described. Exactly as the description of a theistic God. A theistic God is timeless, it's immaterial, it's non-spatial, it's supremely intelligent, it's self-existent, it's infinite, it's immeasurably powerful, and it's morally perfect. Exactly the same definition. Well, let's see what the Bible says about God. And let's try and compare the attributes that we've come up with what the Bible is saying. The Bible has said that God is omnipresent. That is, he exists before time, space, and matter. In John chapter 8, verse 58, it says, "Truly, truly, I tell you," Jesus said, "before Abram, I am," unquote. The Bible also says that God is omnipotent. He has the ability and the power to do everything. In Psalms chapter 147, verse 5, "Great is our Lord and mighty in power. His understanding has no limits," unquote. The universe and life form was designed by an intelligent being. Look at Isaiah chapter 45, verse 12. I quote, "It is I who made the earth and created mankind upon it. My hand stretched out the heavens. I marshal their starry host," unquote. And this being, this God, has the authority on moral law. Romans chapter 2, verse 15, quote, "Since they show that the requisites of the law are written in their hearts, their consciousness also bearing witness," unquote. Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 13, quote, "Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrong," unquote. In the Bible, it also says this God of the Bible is omniscient, had the reasoning and the supreme intelligence to create the universe. 1 John chapter 3, verse 20, quote, "For God is greater than our hearts and knows all things," unquote. So, we have good evidence from the attributes of this intelligent being from reasoning and philosophy. Without using biblical evidence, we compare now, using this evidence compared to what the Bible has said, there is a strong similarity. In fact, it's exactly the same. You would say that, wouldn't you? We use science, we use reasoning, and we use philosophy to come up with this attribute. The evidence is strongly concludes, when we compare to the Bible, that the Bible is the God that we are talking about. The God that science, philosophy, and reasoning is talking about. That the God of the Bible is this theistic God that science, philosophy, and reasoning have come up with. So now, from the evidence we have gathered, we can now look back at the worldviews we discussed earlier and see if they fit the attributes of this theistic God that we've come up with. Let's look at atheism. We can now, with this definition, a theistic God that we've got, we can now eliminate from our worldview because we have concluded that there is a God. So atheism is out. Now look at pantheism. This too we can eliminate because as we concluded that there is a theistic God and this God, this being lives outside the universe, not part of the universe. If you remember my example then is outside this box. Pantheism believes that God is part of the universe, part of everything, part of this box. And that, by our definition, is also out. What's left is theism. It's the only worldview that fits with the evidence that we've gathered so far. Now, there are, however, three major monotheistic religions: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Now, this is the $6 billion question. The question is, can they all be true? Well, you will see later. You will see later that evidence that we will provide will conclude that there can only be one true religion, one true worldview. But remember, I want you to remember this, that we are not saying that all teachings of non-theistic religions or all religions are false. We're not saying that. The other worldviews and other religions do teach goodness, and their teachings have goodness in them. we are not saying that, we are only saying that the parts of their teaching that deviates from the teaching of this theistic religious platform that we have concluded are false. So anything that deviates from this truth platform must be false. That's all we're saying. The parts that deviate. What we're simply saying is that non-theistic worldviews or religions are fundamentally different to a theistic religion, even though there are some similarities and goodness. And with the weight of evidence we have presented so far, the theistic religion provides the most plausible explanation of the reality that's facing us. So in the next session, the third and final session, we're going to now see which of these three monotheistic religion is the one true religion. Before we get on to the third video, let's explore miracles. From our evidence, we've concluded beyond a reasonable doubt that the theistic God exists and that he is very personal. What then can we expect from this personal God who created the universe, with such precision? We can expect that he wants to communicate with us. There must be a reason for him creating time, space, and matter for us. He must want to reveal himself to us, to reveal his objective to us. He must want to communicate with us, but how does he communicate with us? Well, he communicates with us in two ways. The general way, or the general revelation. You can see it from the creation of the universe and life form on earth. You can see the natures, the trees, the flowers, the water, etc. You can see the inbuilt conscious in us. In this way, he has already revealed his nature to us, that he exists, that he's infinite, that he's unimaginably powerful, that he's supremely intelligent and is absolutely morally perfect. He has revealed all of that to us in a general way already, without even needing to read the Bible. Then he specifically revealed his true and in-depth nature in a very specific way. He manifests himself to a select group of people in the past. And he inspired them to write down the messages they heard and they witnessed using a form that is easily duplicated. And yet, here you go, God's respecting our choice again, easily duplicated, and yet it can be ignored by those who choose not to hear it. Remember, God wants us to choose freely without undue influence from him. So the answer and the medium in which he used is a book. But the problem is there are three sources of books, if you like. Remember, there are three monotheistic religions: Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. There are three books. The books are the Tanakh for Judaism, the Bible for Christianity, and the Quran for Islam. Well, there are three books. God needs to tell us that which book is the right one, and which book and which messenger is the right messenger. To do that, God used miracles to help us identify which message and who is the messenger. You know, almost like a seal of authority for a message. Like many years ago, you would have wax seal where you melt wax onto your letter or a proclamation, and you have a certain seal that actually stamps on the wax, and that seal gives you the authority. That seal is unique. It's a seal of authority from the sender. It's almost like your signature today, if you like, or even your digital signature today. It's unique, it's recognizable that it's from you, and something that the sender only possesses. See, miracles can be seen as God's seal of authenticity for his messages and for his messengers. In short, miracles is an act of God to confirm the message of God through a messenger of God. You can also see miracles as a special act of God that interrupts the normal course of events. We might say natural laws describe what happens naturally, and miracles describe what happens supernaturally. You see, there is a supernatural realm that we are looking at here now. This supernatural realm is not part of the natural order of things in a universe. It is outside this universe. It's beyond the natural realm, which is why we call it the supernatural realm. I mentioned the box. I just want you to imagine this. Imagine this box representing the natural world. It's a box, cardboard box perhaps. And God, as we saw just now, is outside this box. It's not in the universe, it's outside this universe. Because he created the universe. He is not part of the universe. God then reaches into this box, doing something in the box that the natural law inside the box wouldn't normally do. A supernatural person doing a supernatural act performed by this person outside the box. He can reach into the box to do certain things. See, miracles is not a normal natural act. It's a supernatural act done by a supernatural person. Let's even further understand what miracles is by looking at what miracles is not. Anomalies, for instance, a bumblebee by their size and wings and body proportion should not be able to fly. It is an anomaly that they can fly, but scientists have realized that bumblebees has a power packed underneath their wings that allow them to flap their wings so fast that they could fly with just such small wings. That's not miracle. Let's call it anomalies. Providence is not miracles. Providence is natural events happening unusually. It's not supernatural. For instance, and during the World War II, during the Allied forces invasion of Normandy, there was this foggy condition on the beach, unusual foggy condition on the beach that helped the Allied forces hide themselves, and they won. That is not miracles. That is providence, nature happening unusually. A true miracle would be that bullets bouncing off the bodies of the Allied soldiers. I mean, that would be a miracle. But miracles are not providence, and anomalies are not miracles. Let's then look at what the true characteristics of miracle must be. A true miracle must come from a supernatural person. It must have the will of God in it. It's supernaturally powerful, and a miracle must be purposeful to glorify this supernatural person, and it's not for entertainment purposes. And the miracles must be absolutely pure. It cannot promote truth. Cannot promote error. It can only promote truth because it's done and formed and created by this supernatural person who is absolutely moral. Now we know there are hundreds of miracles recorded in the Bible, bunched up in three general periods: the period where Moses is, the period of Elijah and Elisha, and Jesus' period. This was a period that God needs most to confirm his message and his messengers. But until now, we have not proved that what was written in the Bible was true and verifiable. We leave it to the next video. And that the miracles stated in the Bible were true and they were actually happened. We just leave it to the next video. What we now are trying to do is conclude the miracles are at least possible, at least plausible with the existence of God. That's what we're trying to do. Well, how do we do that? How do we know that miracles are at least possible? Well, you look at it, the greatest miracle has already happened. The creation of the universe from nothing has already happened. So at least we can say now miracles are at least possible. I mean, if God can make everything from nothing, I mean, if God can create this universe that is 90 billion light years from end to end, he could easily turn water to wine. He could easily heal the sick. He could easily bring the dead back. The Bible has claimed that nothing was too hard for God. So to overcome these objections from skeptics regarding miracles, we need to understand their basis of disbelief. Once we understand where they're coming from, we can then start to speak their language. We can then possibly respond to their disbelief using their language. So let's go there now. Let's have a look at the basis of today's skeptics, today's enlightened thinking, if you like. You see, in today's disbelief comes from a thinking back in the 1700s. Yes, back in the 1700s during the Age of Enlightenment. A famous person, David Hume, lived in 1711 and died in 1776, was a Scottish enlightened philosopher. Now, his thinking about miracles, which still influences today's scientific world, goes something like that. Natural law is a description of regular occurrence. That's number one. Number two, a miracle is by definition a rare occurrence. Then he goes on to say the evidence of the regular is always greater than the rare. Number four is the wise man always bases his belief on the greater evidence. Then he concludes in the end, therefore, a wise man should never believe in miracles. See, the five-part logical thinking, this framework has a flaw in it, and the flaw is in the third item. The third item says the evidence of the regular is always greater than the rare. See, by greater, what David Hume's or what people take it to be was number of instances. When greater, they don't think of believability. Item 3 can easily be refuted because there are rare events that has happened and they are believable. It may not happen many times, it could have just happened once, but they are believable. I mean, the history of the world is riddled with rare occurrences that are believable. I'll give you an example. My own birth. I only was born once, but I believe I was born because I exist, I'm here. The birth of the universe happened only once, and the Darwinists themselves believe that it happened because the universe exists today. So their argument that a wise man always bases belief on greater evidence in terms of quantity is flawed. If we insert greater evidence, if it is believable. Therefore, by that definition, a wise man should also believe in the possibility of miracles because rare occurrences are and can be believable. See, the problem with naturalists' view of miracles is not a matter, it's a matter of the heart, not evidence. They just do not want to believe in miracles regardless of the evidence because there is, of course, a moral judgment involved. In fact, naturalists, they do believe in miracles, but they believe in it selectively. I'll give an example. They have no problems believe that they have won first prize in a lottery draw last week. Even though it only occurred once in their lifetime or perhaps never ever occur again, only rarely did it occur, they will have no problems believing in it. You will not catch them saying, no, I don't believe that I've won because it's a rare occurrence and I only believe in events with greater occurrences. So I'm not going to cash in my ticket. I bet they'll be cashing in the ticket instantaneously. So you see, miracles are indeed highly possible. In fact, there are hundreds, and the last count, and some say there are 250 miracles that are listed in the Bible. How can we tell they actually happened? How can we tell they are real? Well, the only way is to make sure that the Bible is believable. It's to gather enough evidence, sufficient evidence again, to come to beyond a reasonable doubt that the Bible is true. And it's believable and it can be relied on. let's cover what we have done so far. In this video, we gathered ample and sufficient evidence and analyzed the evidence, and we concluded beyond a reasonable doubt that a theistic God exists. Then we went on to compare the attributes of this theistic God to that of the God of the Bible, and we found and concluded that this theistic God's attributes is exactly the same as the attributes described in the God of the Bible. Then we said, well, if God exists, then the plausibility of miracles is true, and that God actually uses miracles to communicate that his message and his messengers are indeed authentic. That, in a sense, is what we did in this video. The conclusion, thus, is that there is a theistic God that is the God of the Bible, and that this God of the Bible does do miracles. Now, up to now, we have not looked at the authenticity and the accuracy of the Bible, which we will in the next video. So in the next session, we will gather enough evidence for the authenticity and the believability of the Bible. The process in which we will use will be this, that if, and now I'm saying only if because we haven't gathered evidence yet, if we can prove that the New Testament is a true and verifiable historical document that we can all rely on, if we can prove that, we can then see what this reliable document called the New Testament has to say about the main character, Jesus Christ. And if we can prove that this main character, Jesus Christ, is God, then we know whatever God says must be true. We know whatever Jesus, the God, says must be true. And if this God of the Bible says that the Bible is true, and it is the true word of God, then we can conclude that it is true because God doesn't lie. So that is the process we're going on. We're going to use. We will explore this in depth in our next session. So do come back, and we will finish it off with ample proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Christianity is the one true religion. God bless.